Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barreto, and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth, at home, in business, or in my community. I'm excited about our guest today. I've known Dora for a few years, and she was actually on my list for the original season of the podcast. Life got in the way, and in the meantime, I became an angel investor in the business, and we work together regularly. That just gave me even more reasons to think that she would be a perfect guest here. The Make Space for Growth podcast amplifies the voices of women entrepreneurs and leaders, celebrating the strength and resilience it takes to thrive in both business and life. I believe women can be at the forefront of shaping industries with journeys of adaptability, bold decisions, and perseverance. This is a story to be heard and recognized. This podcast embraces the full self because the success extends through the professional and the personal. By sharing these stories, we hope to inspire and reshape the narrative about leadership. I want to welcome Dora Palfi to the podcast. Dora is a co-founder and CEO of Imagi, an EdTech company reimagining technology education for the age of AI. Dora has a bachelor's degree in neuroscience with a minor in computer science from New York University, Abu Dhabi, and has studied human-computer interaction at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm as part of the European Union's EIT Digital Master School, receiving merit-based scholarships for both of these programs. She has worked as a developer at Morgan Stanley and as a UX designer at Cisco. Dora has been recognized on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list as one of Europe's leading social entrepreneurs, as a lead 2030 winner by One Young World, and serves as a Cartier Women's Initiative Fellow. Her energy and passion for her business are contagious. Let's bring her in. There we go. Dora, welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, my first favorite question is always the same. What did you want to be when you grew up, and what was your favorite thing to do as a child?
Right. So I don't remember what I wanted to be when I was really young, but certainly from around like 10 and after, I was really obsessed with like the brain. In general biology, I was pretty sure I would be like a research scientist, so either like a brain scientist or work with genetics, something around the human body and science. Um, but in terms of like what I loved to do, actually, I think my most favorite thing was always exercise and being active. Um, to my knowledge, when I was, very young, I was attending like 19 different activities weekly. So that was the only way my mom could handle me because I had too much energy. So I was I was sent to everything from swimming to dancing to running, just like to handle my energy.
I gotta say, with two kids that are managing a handful of activities each, I cannot imagine 19. So I do not envy your mom at this point. But maybe in your future there will be a children management system of how to
Yeah.
manage energetic children. We'll keep that one for later. So you have a very diverse background, right? You've studied neuroscience in Abu Dhabi. You worked at Morgan Stanley and Cisco. How do you feel like these experiences prepared you for then launching a business?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of my favorite books is called Range, and the subtitle of it is How Generalists Thrive in a Specialized World. And reading that book, I feel like really justified my existence and my education in a way where my undergraduate education was a liberal arts school. So the way that works is even though neuroscience was my major and computer science my minor, I was required to take courses within the arts, within the humanities, social studies. And so I got a very rounded education experience. And I think just like what that prepared me for was essentially being adaptable and getting used to like new challenges and new situations all the time. And I think that's like one of the most important things to be good at, adapting and just getting used to solving all sorts of different types of problems and challenges.
All right, so then you're all set to succeed as a founder with an incredible ability to adapt, and I've seen a little bit of that over the last couple of years. But then what inspired you, right? What led you to co-found Imagi, and how do you feel like prior experiences influenced you getting there?
Yes, so I co-founded Imagi with Beatrice, who was my best friend since university, and her and I had a sort of like a similar background. We grew up in Eastern Central Europe, and then we both went on with a scholarship to study at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I studied neuroscience and computer science. She studied electrical engineering, so we were like in the STEM fields. And during our studies, of course, we often experience, being the only or few few of the girls. And then that also continued when we went on to work. In my role as a software engineer, I was the one told that, oh, you're the girl on the seventh floor, right? So I was the only like female software engineer in that whole department. And so those experiences like led to us being kind of curious and frustrated with the question of like, why is there not more diversity within tech? We just believe that tech is our future, and so if we want tech to serve everyone's needs, then it would be logical that everyone needs to be involved with the creation of it. And so as we sort of like dig deeper there, we understood that like girls tend to lose their interest and confidence towards tech already in the younger ages. And so between usually like 11 to 14. And so that was kind of like the initial seed and the idea for Imagine. We wanted to create a way to gain skills and knowledge and confidence and really an increased sense of belonging towards tech so that we could have a pipeline of more diverse talent going into that industry.
Yeah, and you started really with this, I guess, with this more gender focused idea, and actually that's how I came across Imagi, and how I bought my first Imagi charm for my daughter as well, and but as I know, Imagi has evolved to a different vision and to a broader vision, I guess. Can you explain a little bit of what is the vision for Imagi today, and a little bit the concept behind what you're offering?
Yes. So, yeah, that's a great point. And you have a lot of understanding of our history. So I think, on one hand, it evolved in terms of like the target group that we want to reach. And then on the other hand, we also understood that, okay, every girl goes to school. So if we're able to reach schools, then we actually can reach a large number of our initial intended beneficiaries. And in fact, we can reach them in a way that's not sort of like exclusive, right? Like in an environment where like all students feel like they belong and they don't need to be singled out and that this is only for them, might be more impactful and sustainable for the future. But through like the Imagine charm being out there and people trying it out, we got a ton of feedback that like boys love this too, or through the product being so nice to sort of like hold and tangible. We got a lot of input from educators working with, for example, kids on the spectrum or special education classrooms in the US that like, oh, actually students like love this. So, we started to explore like what are sort of like the other groups that could benefit from this. And then I think also in terms of like the vision, like I've been referring to the term technology, which really had a different focus a couple of years ago from what it has now. And so at that point, it focused a lot on like coding skills, and then it got expanded more into like computer science as a whole. And now, when we talk about computer science as a whole, it also, of course, focuses a lot on AI. So that has been sort of like an evolution with how our world and our industry has been changing.
So I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because I think sometimes people just see the end product and they don't really understand how much it evolves over time, and how, their original passion is still in there because you wanted to change, the pipeline of girls going into STEM. But actually the solution to the problem has evolved over time because you have identified other groups and you've identified other ways to reach that goal. And I think that's important to bring it up because people don't, they see, oh, look at that, this is how they went B2B, and they're doing all these schools in the US, and that's actually not where you started. And so that leads me a little bit to one of the a kind of CEO or a co-founder type of question, where you're developing this vision, you're adapting this business, you're doing the sales outreach, you're managing production, maybe you're building teams. How do you manage your time?
Yes, I think that's definitely a challenge. I think for some, and some would maybe call me like the type like A student, where I was like, straight A student, and just always knowing what to do to like get the good grade. And so then when you start your own business, there is no like getting a good grade. There's nobody like telling you, there's like no clear like sort of like milestones to hit and then okay, you did a good job. So I think like it comes a lot more about like self-management and staying on track. So for me, like I personally have a system for like tracking how I spend my time, and then I compare that with my goals and priorities, and is this aligning with where my goals and priorities are. And so in the case of a startup, it could be a huge shift from week to week or period to period, that sometimes a majority of my time, especially in the beginning, was on actually product, because that's also part of my background. Then in certain periods, it's almost entirely sales or fundraising. So I think it's a lot about sort of like flexibility. And then I think in between sort of like vision versus like execution, I think it's important to have like a defined cadence at which you evaluate the vision, but then sort of like the periods in between, unless like something radical happens, like a huge shift in industry, like try not to question it every day. But really, like just have that defined cadence when you bring up the uncertainties, when you reconnect with the purpose. But then in between, like focus a bit more on execution. So at least that's what has worked for me, because you cannot get like distracted by sort of existential questions every single day.
No, I think you're right. I think if you start engaging in what if scenarios every day, then you're not going to get anything done. But you do have a good discipline in terms of making sure that at a certain time you do stop and say, right, let me just think of something that is not just doing the next sale right now, which is hard, right? Because in a way you need that sale for the business to be successful. But at the same time, I think you are pretty good at recognizing that right now I just need to stop and talk about this, even if it's just for 1 hour. And that's great. And you started talking a little bit about, this need to adapt, and maybe it would be interesting if you can maybe give a few examples of what challenges have you faced as you developed and scaled this business, and how have you addressed them?
Right. Infinite amount of challenges. I think I
Yeah,
always say like,
yeah, let's pick a
um,
few, right? Otherwise we
but
won't
yeah,
finish
I think I
today.
always say like I was so naive starting this, and it was probably helpful, because if I had known, what type of challenges we're going to face, it would have been much more difficult. I think, there's challenges that are external, like from things like COVID to political shifts and and just like the market changing, that are completely out of your control, and then they will just come your way. And then it becomes more like a we need to adapt and react and survival. There's certain periods like that, and then of course there is the challenges that would be less of a challenge for a second time founder, but as a first time founder you need to understand, like from legal to financing. For me, like personally, I came more from like an engineering background, so in the beginning I guess I could call it a challenge that I had to learn a lot of new skills. And I was lucky, for example, one of the programs I often talk about is the Cartier Women's Initiative. They actually I was part of that program very early into our journey with Imagi, and they actually like financed for me to attend like a financial modeling course and have like a fractional CFO working with me on that, and also for me to do an executive MBA at INSEAD. So essentially, like I learned on the business, all the business things, but I did have some framework around it. And so I think that was a challenge as a non-business background founder, but sort of like got the resources, and then I think also had a lot of mentors. So I think that's something I learned early on, that like founders tend to be extremely helpful. Like I started this in Stockholm, where there's a fairly high density of founders, and people are extremely, like, even very busy people have been extremely generous with their time when I reached out with a specific question where it was kind of obvious like why I'm asking them because they are the expert. And so people have been fairly generous with their time to help solve these challenges or questions that arise.
Mhm. We spoke a little bit about this shift, but I can't really resist asking it a little bit more, because we've spoken offline about it, and I think it's important. Some people kind of argue that learning coding is not really necessary in the age of AI, right? And it's what's the point? Computers are going to do it for us. But Imagi has become about much more than coding. And that's an evolution that you've pushed for, and you and Beatrice have done in the company. How does AI fit in this vision that you have for the future of Imagi, and how it goes big and global?
Right. So I think there's like two parts to this question. There's like the skills that are needed for careers, and then there's also like the things that we learn in school, right? And we're a K-12 product, so we sell to schools, and the first part of it is that, schools like fundamentally teach kids how to think, how to learn, and also how the world around them works. So I think it is quite natural that if more and more of our world is actually created with and by AI and with code, then this should actually become like a fundamental skill to at least acquire some level of understanding. And then if we think of sort of like the actual skill itself, this is still really early to tell, but I'm very deep into kind of like research and understanding what are the skills that will need to be emphasized and de-emphasized within like software. Um, Thanks to new tools that AI tools that actually can write code for you, but it seems quite obvious right now that like if someone doesn't have the fundamental understanding, then these tools are actually not that useful. And I think if you think about sort of like democratizing and making sure that everyone at least like has a basic understanding of the world around that, like how the world works around us, it's a bit like how with mathematics, like we've had calculators for a really long time, but for small kids they still learn how to add and subtract and do basic math, and then once they know the basics, they use the calculator to, solve more complex problems. And so that's a bit the way we look at it, that like the basic, like algorithmic thinking, computational thinking, and it's just like sort of like the concepts will be important to be understood and learned by younger kids. And then we can now really become more ambitious of like all the things that high schoolers or like even middle schoolers will be able to do once they have that fundamental understanding. And so going more into that direction of bringing in no code, low code, vibe code, and a lot of like, other tools, and also just developing that sort of like AI intuition. And I think something that's important, and if not schools, then who is going to do this, is the privacy and the ethical part of it. And so there's a lot of conversation these days in education about these two topics. So, ensuring that in the future, sort of like the future generation involved with creating and managing AI will be thinking about the ethical implications and will have the background knowledge to even think about it. And the same with privacy and data protection. You need to have a better understanding as you're growing up in order to like make informed decisions about your own data.
Yeah, and I did want to talk about that, because at the end of the day, when people, look at it, they may think, oh, it's the tech part that they think about, but actually there's a whole critical thinking development, a whole understanding of how it works, and obviously all the ethical part that you just mentioned, where you still need to understand what it means to be able to have that, and so that will be even more important in a world that will be more dominated by AI rather than less. So, what are the plans for the future of Imagi, and as you establish yourself as a global edtech firm?
Yeah, so I think like some of the topics I just touched upon are sort of like in the pipeline for us to develop resources for. And I think, you know, us at Imagi, like we are a very sort of like creative brand, and we were rooted in the fact that like our sort of like first flagship product, the Imagi Trump, came from like user-centered research, was created in a way where kids love learning with this. And so what I'm seeing in the edtech space now is that there's a lot of solutions that like quickly arise that kind of like check boxes, like here's an outline to like talk to kids with about like ethical AI or whatnot. And so our sort of like brand and company is really rooted in coming up with new and innovative ways that will be actually engaging for kids to facilitate this learning experience. So that's kind of like a part of it, like continuing to innovate new learning experiences along these essentially like new areas that need to be developed. And then, like you mentioned, global. So obviously, that's part of our ambition. We ultimately, like we said, started the company to have impact on the pipeline and the diversity of the pipeline who will be creating our future with tech. So of course, to have a meaningful impact, that means you need to get to a certain scale. So we hope to continue reaching more and more kids globally. And we have a consumer app that kids use, and we practically have kids from every country around the world, and we've had close to 400,000 kids who've been coding on that one. But our school solution is much newer, and we are focusing a lot more on that solution today. And when you think of impact, like that solution has a much deeper impact. So now we're thinking, how can it reach a similar scale with a deeper impact, essentially?
It's great, and I can't wait. So the I always like to talk a little bit about the executive as well, right? And I know you may look back and say, well, can I really be called an executive given, you're still pretty at an early stage of that. But at the same time, truth be said, you've been through quite a journey, right? And you've started, I guess you brought it up early in terms of your liberal arts training and this, so you started already as a certain person in this journey, and you've had a few ups and downs, I'm certain, and infinite amount of challenges as you describe. When you look at yourself as a leader, what do you feel like are some consistent habits or maybe some philosophies that you've maintained over time?
So yeah, I guess I'm not sure if I'd call them philosophies, but it's more like first just like an anecdote. So I also am a certified yoga teacher. So even when I started Imagi, I was actually like a yoga teacher actively at the time, which meant that like no matter how busy I got, like there was one or two weekly classes I held, and so I always said that was great because as a teacher I couldn't cancel on it. I actually had to show up. So I think that's sort of like more of a habit, but I think like making space for um like exercise and making space for like a mental break has been a very consistent habit of mine, and I think has served me really, really well. And especially as I started to travel more with work, I feel like habits became even more important because I think it's really easy to sort of like get lost and slip off when you're traveling. And so I think I've been really consistent at my like daily habits as I'm traveling. And so I think that has helped me kind of like stay on track and stay motivated over time. And so I think like yeah, maybe again, not sure if that's a philosophy, but we are a very like impact driven like founding team and overall team. Actually, everyone who's been joining us like very impact driven. So I think like my philosophy, if we could say that, is to like when questioning, when some uncertainty pops up, like go back to the root and connect back to like, is this ultimately serving what we're trying to achieve? And so I think that has helped us in again like staying motivated and staying on track. Because I think in the long run, when you look back, like that's what's going to matter.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you immediately bring together your personal habits with your work habits and philosophy, because at the end of the day that is how it works for you. And if you look at yourself as a leader, right? Because you're building a team and you're now trying to drive this small ship, and how do you feel like you would describe your leadership, or who's Dora the leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think would be like the word authentic is fairly overused, but I think that's what like I get as a feedback most. I think like me as a leader has been like very much driven by again like the mission and being like very clear on the why. And so I think to me that makes sort of like just like the same as it makes like sales easier, it makes like leadership easier. And at times, leadership is sort of like sales, like, sort of like selling your team on the vision and on what we're trying to achieve. And so I think when you truly believe in something, like it becomes much easier to do that. So I think that has kind of like described, yeah, like my leadership style, just like very clearly driven by the why and the purpose. And so I think, like I said, like I have pretty consistent like structures for, when we kind of like questioning vision and when we're executing. And so I think that has been like a strong like part of my leadership and sort of like setting up that structure, not just for myself, but for everyone else we're working with. Um, and I think that really helps with navigating sort of like uncertainty and navigating like changes that come up because there is a structure to follow. And so I think that also helps with sort of like being transparent through that process, like helps with again, if some big changes happen that are out of our control, at least we know that like we sort of like did our part, and so I think like that has been part of yeah, like the way I've led.
What do you think is the hardest part of your day job, of your day, or your day job? I think that's the right way to put it.
Mhm. I think it's like what I kind of like alluded in the beginning, that there is no like, it's not like being in school and like knowing what to do and then getting an A. And so I think like one of the hardest thing about your day job is that you have so limited time, and so what you decide to do, like it's sort of like quote on like every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So I think the hardest thing is probably the prioritization and like what is it that you choose to do in that limited time that you have.
Yeah, prioritization is always one of those that is a hard one to grasp. But I'd like to tell you that it gets better, but I'm not sure. So, but I'm sure we'll work together on that. So, and what do you think is the biggest kind of lesson you've taken from your entrepreneurial journey so far?
um yeah, I think or specifically like now because we talked about leadership, I was thinking about like in the leadership journey, I think like one thing I learned, and that I also try to keep it central, is um, another book I loved, like Brené Brown's sort of like leadership books, and I think she has a very beautiful way of saying this, so probably much better than I do. But essentially, sort of like how clarity is kindness. So sometimes like you maybe someone that you're managing like didn't deliver exactly what you wanted to, and you might just like look over that, but then it happens again. And I think like the more clear you are on expectations, and when you are clear about something that didn't meet your expectation, like that's actually kind. Sometimes people think the kind thing to do is to be sort of like polite about it, but I think the thing to do is actually like um you know to give that honest feedback. And sometimes that's harder, or like I feel like it doesn't come natural, right? Because most of us like don't want to make others feel bad, but actually like the ultimately the kind thing to do is to be direct and clear on your expectations and on your feedback.
I love that Brene Brown was quoted, and it wasn't from me because I'm quoting her all the time in the blog.
Oh, I see.
I'm a big fan, but it's true. Like the clarity point is definitely one where sometimes we avoid it, thinking we're doing someone, and we're being nice, and it's actually quite the opposite, right? And so we spoke about the leader, Dora the leader. What about Dora the person? What does a good day look like for you?
Yeah, so I think the reason why I do love like the whole startup concept and my role is because I love change and variety. And so I think also the reason why I can be energized through so many hours is because sometimes it feels like I'm starting a second workday or a third workday because I spent a couple hours doing one thing and then a couple hours doing something else. So for me, definitely a good day is like a good mix. Like maybe I get like 3 to 4 hours of like focused work and feel like, wow, I really had a good output there. But then have a 3 to 4 hour of like very good like social, interaction, and maybe having sales calls or other like meetings that are also productive. So I think for me, it's usually like a good balance between yeah, uninterrupted work, but then also sort of the opportunity to interact with others.
And it's I think you might have started with this answer already, but when we talked about the habits, but just in case you have extra tips to add, how do you feel like you create space for yourself to re-energize and recharge? And you did speak a little bit about the importance of keeping that, especially as you travel quite a bit. How can you do that?
Yes, I think so. Like I, a bit similarly to my previous answer, which is around like how satisfying it is to also have like uninterrupted work. I think That's something you need to be very like intentional about and like block in your calendar and actually stick with it. It's so easy to like, be in the moment, be like, okay, actually, no, I don't have time for this now. I'm gonna do these other things. So I think for me, it's it's kind of like time blocking on my calendar and then honoring that. The decisions I made when I was the most clear-minded is the way I can actually sort of like recharge and re-energize. And so for me personally, a lot of that is around exercise. Certain cases it is social activity, but certain cases actually it's more about I'm going to be recharged by doing something alone. So I think it differs for everyone, but I think it's like the intentionality and then I'm blocking off the times and then respecting that. I'd say like that's my sort of like that is what has worked for me. And yeah, I'm quite strict on that.
No, the calendar, assuming it's a meeting like any other, is an important one, but it
I
is not
think yes.
something everybody follows through on.
Yeah, I think the quote here, and I think that was in maybe Melinda Gates's book, something like in the moment of life, like if you don't plan your time, someone else will plan it for you. And so I think like when you don't block off, then it will just get filled up with other people's priorities as opposed to your priorities.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. If you don't choose how you use your time, someone else will. So it's you have to do that. So to finish us off, what advice would you give to the younger Dora starting her career or even starting Imagi?
yes, I think, well, that's a wonderful question. I think like when I kind of before Imagi, when I started my career and even when I was in university, I think I was quite like stuck in ways of thinking of like what's the next obvious thing in my career, what's the right thing to do next, and kind of following expectations of others. So I think it took me a while to reach this conclusion of what I call like it's better to kind of like walk your own path imperfectly than like follow someone else's path perfectly, because that's kind of like the logical thing that's laid out. So I think like for me that took quite a long time to get to that. But then I think like starting Imagi was kind of part of that process, being like, no, actually I'm going to do this on my own way and figure out my own path. And then I think specifically like when starting Imagi, I mean, like I understand why people, for example, investors would be like, oh, are you a first time founder? Like they prefer second time founders, which is very frustrating when you're a first time founder. But I completely understand, where it's coming from, because if I had to do all of this again, like it would take a fraction of time. And I think mostly around kind of just like making decisions quicker and maybe trusting your gut a bit more, I think would be a good advice.
Yeah, you can be a second time founder without being a first time founder though.
Yes, unfortunately.
So let's just round it up with a quick fire round. And you spoke about a few books already, so I am curious about which one would you recommend?
Because I said so much like nonfiction books, I will maybe like go with a fiction. Um, Not necessarily the best one, but one of my favorites from the recent years is a book called Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow.
Okay, I'm gonna list that out. And do you have a particular quote that inspires you either throughout life or in at this particular moment in time?
Mm. So I think I quoted a lot of different things today already. Um, but a different quote that it's not going to be an exact quote, I'm sorry. But as a yoga teacher, I always spoke about this specific sort of like concept that like um, action breeds confidence. So I think oftentimes when we're so paralyzed, we just, think too much about what we want to do. And I think this helps in entrepreneurship, but usually like once you start acting and seeing that you're that person, that like gives you a lot of confidence.
Breeds confidence is a good one. I like that. And what about, do you have a word of the year?
So I typically have multiple words of the year.
Okay, you
Um,
can have a few, but not too many.
this year has been a lot about kind of defying limitations. And I think that's not one word, but Beatrice and I have talked a lot about how, like, so we ourselves set a lot of our own limitations. And so I think, for example, like being female founders, like you often think that like the narrative around being a founder and a female founder like actually does impact the way you think about yourself. And so I think like what we have discussed for this year has been a lot around sort of like breaking free from those limitations that we ourselves set because of the yeah how the world around us works and the expectations. So I think if you have a good word, one word description for that.
One, but I think we can go with breaking boundaries. That works fine. And actually, I will probably respond with the book Upper Limits, because it's
Okay.
very much about us identifying and seeing how our own upper limits are affecting our lives and affecting our business persona and affecting our careers. So maybe that's one to add to your list that we can discuss at some point.
Love that. Thank you for the recommendation. Yeah.
Dora, it's been wonderful to have you here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and it's always energizing because I do find that you are truly living your passion and your drive to build this business, and that shows. And it's always amazing to see that. And today, especially here at the podcast, thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Such a blast chatting to Dora today. I never get tired hearing about the way she's developing Imagi together with her co-founder Beatrice. She has such passion, but also such resilience and adaptability. I thought it was particularly interesting the way that her training and her education contributed to her having a flexible and adaptable approach from the start. That is a key feature as a founder. And I guess you could tell how excited I was when she started quoting Brené Brown. I mean, I don't even have to be the one bringing it up. What was your favorite part of the podcast today? What are your takeaways? Share your comments and lessons, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. That helps more people get inspired by these conversations. Thank you for listening to the Make Space for Growth podcast. And until we meet again, I get to do this.